Now, in 1986, when we were growing Great Western Resources, oil dropped in January from $28 a barrel to $14 a barrel. The share price, and you have to remember, or you don't have to remember, I'll tell you, share price in the UK, they're like penny stocks. They're not high price stocks. So it went from £1.20 to 58p, and that was the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound. Great Western shares were a high of £3, which was $3.50 in December of '84, when the company was worth nothing really, and they got down to a low of 50 pence, which was about 80 cents in June of '86. I put this chart up because it's an important principle. We made an acquisition in January of 1986. We bought a company, or a series of companies, and we bought assets for about $55 million. Before the deal closed, oil had already dropped $10 a barrel. So we're already 30% we lost on our money before the deal closes. Now the natural inclination would have been to renegotiate the deal. Is that probably correct? I didn't. For a lot of reasons. It's an important concept. I didn't because when you're starting out, a lot of times your word's going to be your bond. When I tell you something, they used to say, when Dan tells you it's Christmas in July, you can hang your Christmas stocking. Now, I stuck with that deal, even though I lost 30% before I closed, because it was important that I knew when S.G. Warburg, who I ultimately wanted down the road, looked at my track record, they knew that I was willing to take a bath to keep my word. I mean, before the deal closed, I don't know if Leanne remembers that, when we bought L&B, the price of oil collapsed as we're signing things, and virtually anybody, the normal inclination would have been to renegotiate the deal. But I was looking down the road. I was looking at S.G. Warburg. I was looking at $100 million deals, $150 million deals, and I knew that I would never attract the kind of ilk of advisor that I wanted to get to $2 billion if I had a track record of agreeing, signing, and having interim financing of a deal and then back out. So I ate dirt for about, let's see, what's 30% of $55 million, whatever that is, 15 million bucks? 17.5 million bucks. Because, and at that time, I owned 44% of the company. So I ate dirt for 8 million bucks. Because it was more important to me to set up the institutions to have, so I would have credibility to do the next bigger deal. Now I made multiples of the $8 million when we did the next deal. And it's important, especially when you're starting out. If you start, and there are times when you can back out of a deal, but there aren't times when you can renege on a deal. Not in my book. There just aren't. Even if it costs you money. Even if it costs you money. It's an important concept, and if you want joint venture partners, one of the reasons that John Allen and I could do business again very easily, probably will now, is because John Allen and I know when I told John Allen this was it was Christmas in July, John just went and got his Christmas suit on, and when he told me the same, there was a rapport that exists because we had plenty of chances to, shall we say, take advantage of one another. When you smile like that, John, it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous. The one that John Allen really made nervous was Mark Harrison. The other lawyer, because they thought all the devious ways that things could have happened, but Okay. Okay. Now, conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom right now, and we're going to talk about, because you always need a reason to overlook the obvious. People told me that I shouldn't go into the coal business because I didn't know anything about it. People have told Casey that he can't acquire a company that's much bigger than he is with no money because, I mean, it's against conventional wisdom. For geometric growth, exponential growth, you're going to have to look for a reason to overlook which is obvious. Normally, the most obvious rationale that will be given you, in my judgment, my experience, is wrong. Just as when the lawyer used to come in and say, there's no chance, we used to go, it's a winner. I mean, if you can find a guy like that, a benchmark that you can use, I mean, like I did for a lot of years, and he's a very successful, he represents Exxon and Barclays Bank in London today, very successful attorney. I mean, but it's hard when you're at the embryonic stage of your career. It's very difficult to overlook the obvious and to go against conventional wisdom. It's almost impossible. And what we decided, and what I told the newspapers, is we decided not to participate in the energy recession. We only simulated positive occurrences and acted as if we had no limits to our abilities. I would run around Great Western, and I would only talk about the positive things, not about the times that we weren't successful. I mean, we overlooked the obvious, and we focused in on what we saw, the company's goals, just as you have to focus in on what you see. And you have to look way down the road. You have to set your goals, in my judgment, very, very high. Now, let's see. Because for those of you that know that we're in a recessionary environment, every time I'm in a recession, they tell me it's going to last forever. It's always the worst recession since in the last 35 years. I've been through so many worse recessions since the last 35 years. The bear market of 72, 73, when the Dow, the old Dow, or the current Dow hit, I believe, 570 in time. But, I mean, it's always the toughest time, and it's not really. I mean, I never lived through the Depression, but then now they say it's the toughest time since the Depression in a lot of industries. I know when we were building Great Western Resources, it was the toughest oil recession or depression that they had in 50 years. But the thing is, tough times don't last. What does last are tough people. And I would submit to you that that's the way that you will build your business. We're going to take another short break, get some coffee, stretch, and we'll be back in a few minutes. We've already talked about sticking to your knitting and to maximize the return on investment capital and deploying your asset, resources, and capabilities in those areas when your expertise lies. And I've already pounded to death, dream big, think big, be big. But with that comes big problems. If your problems are not being replaced by larger, more complicated problems, you're not growing. That's a funny concept to get used to. But if your problems are not being replaced by more complicated problems, then you're not growing, by definition. You're not. One of the things that I've been more successful in instilling in my younger son is, and it costs nothing to aim high. He batted 650 this last year in Little League, his first year. Derek didn't know batting 650 was a big deal. And to his credit, his coach didn't allow the students to know their batting average during the entire season, to his credit. I'd never seen that done before. Never. He batted 650, and for those of you that know him, he never played baseball. He picked up his first baseball mitt and glove December 8th last year. And when we went out to at the castle for Christmas last year, both boys said they wanted to play baseball. And I didn't play baseball. But I said, okay, I bought a book on Little League, and I did all this stuff, and we're at the castle. It's cold, so we're out there practicing, and I measured out a diamond. I didn't know Little League diamonds were smaller. So I measured out 300 and what do you call it, feet left field. Pitcher's diamond, whatever, was it 60 feet in the pros? 60 feet. And I had them trying to peg the ball in from center field. At first they couldn't get it to second base. And then they'd run like a javelin, and they could get it past second base, and then they finally could get it over the pitcher's mound, but they could never get it to home. Well, when they went for the tryouts at the Little League, I mean, they both looked like Brooks Robinson. A lot of you aren't old enough to know who he was, but for the Baltimore Orioles, played shortstop. I mean, they fired like cannons from shortstop to first base, and they hit pretty well. Derek hit super well. But what I didn't teach him is fly balls. I didn't think of that. So when Dan tried out for the team, he's overrunning the ball, underrunning the ball, and he didn't catch one ball. Derek, on the other hand, I took him immediately to the park because he had to do that the next day. And, well, we did nothing but hit fly balls to him. So when he did it, he understood. But Derek, you know, I told him, Derek, it's important to get on base every single time, even if you have to step into the pitch. I don't care what you do. Now, Jim, you know Derek. Okay. Yes, he did. I said, I don't care. And I said, important to get on base. To help your team to win, you got to get on base, boy, before you can get around the home plate. So Derek swings like Babe Ruth. I mean, he has kind of a little punch, and he swings with everything, okay? But he's also got great hand-eye coordination, as Jim used to be his tennis coach knows. And so he thought it was bad that when he got walked, and he played catcher. And he was the only catcher in the league that could throw him out at second base. He's the only one. He had an arm like a bazooka. But I made him wearing wind sprints back and forth. And you know, I didn't know how you train for baseball. I mean, so when they got there, they thought training camp was a piece of cake. They thought it was Disneyland. I said, God. I knocked Derek out pitching to him because I was trying to throw the ball soft, but I still must have been throwing at 60, 70 miles an hour, which is significantly faster than they do in his league. And I knocked Derek out, and I knocked Dan woozy pitching to him. But Derek, I mean, he's stepping to the plate, and he's catcher. He knows how to block that plate. And I said, it's like a linebacker. You lunge up into him, Derek, when they're blocking that home plate. Now, he was the only catcher in the league that did that. And I mean, when he was sick and he'd miss a game or two, the coach would have an attack. Well, where is he? I mean, what's wrong with him? So, but Derek, and they come in first place, and he was the star of the thing, and so, but see, Derek didn't know that it didn't cost anything to aim high. I told him you ought to be able to bat 1,000. And you better get on base every damn time. And he almost did. See, and it's where we set our expectations because it doesn't cost anything to aim high. Now, if you're experiencing no anxiety or discomfort, the risk you're taking probably isn't worthy of you. The only risks that aren't a little scary, are the ones you've outgrown. I'm going to say that again. The only risks that aren't a little scary are the ones you've outgrown. A high comfort level provides solid evidence that you're playing it safe, not growing, not really testing your limits at all, and not in the process of a quantum leap. If you're comfortable at work, if you're comfortable with your job, then by definition, you're not growing. By definition. Now, we're going to have a handout, the red flag checklist, investment checklist. After the first couple of seminars, I was asked, I'd go through these lists, and now we've memorialized them, and we put them down on paper. And if you want to realize exponential growth from investment in your business and your life, and of course you do, after all, that's why we're all here, but in order to succeed, you must be prepared to engage in the most difficult undertaking of your life. I can't do it for you, but here's a checklist of items you will need to consider up front to have any reasonable chance of achieving success in your investments in business and in life. And they are most of which we've already talked about, and I'm going to run through them very quickly. Investigate before you invest. Stick to your knitting. Stay laser beam focused. Plan well, but then implement and execute. Avert avoidable mistakes. Forget about that which you cannot change. Seek advice of those who you respect. Dedicate yourself. Base your search on information you have. Now, this is a checklist. I hire a lot of private investigators to investigate people before I go into business with them. Ross Perot does that. And he was chastised during the presidential election. But Ross Perot's avoided a lot of crappy deals because of that. Now, he took a lot of derisive remarks. I don't particularly agree with the people that chastise him because I do it myself. And I tell people I do it myself. I do it at various stages of the transaction. Sometimes I do it at the very end. Sometimes I do it at the very beginning. If I'm uncomfortable, I do it at the very beginning. It's better for me to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, find out the guy or the gal is no good early on. Sometimes I do it at the very end, but I always do it. I may go 5 months of preparation, but I always do it, no matter what. And it's always money well spent. But we've then now listed some of the things, some of the places you can do it on your own. Check for lawsuits, voters' records, criminal convictions. You can check both the individual name and the company names. Libraries have a lot of information. Special licensing, if you're a contractor, you're a builder, you're real estate, you're a lawyer, you're an accountant. I mean, there's agencies that keep track of you. A dead giveaway is when somebody says he graduated from the University of Texas in 1971, got a PhD from Harvard in 1974, and was an Oxford scholar, and then you go back and you check that, and he attended Harvard or wherever I said to get a PhD, but he never finished. That's the end of the negotiation. There is no more. Don't call me. I'll call you. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Get out of my face. That is it. And it happens all the time. Mike, please.
You mentioned if someone says they got a degree and they don't have it, kill the deal. After you do these searches, what are the things that say, get me out, I'm concerned, and that's okay?
Okay. If there's any lying, any falsification of their CV, as they say in England, or the resume, as they say here, then if they felt the need to lie or puff about their background, then they're going to feel the need when the deal doesn't go right to exaggerate, puff, or lead me astray or my people astray down the road, and they can't be trusted. Whereas if they say that, like I graduated on the dean's list when I got out of college, I don't say I graduated with honors, because I didn't graduate magna summa or whatever the hell the other one is. And I used to say, I know Leanne's corrected me, I know we've written some of these things where I said one time I graduated with honors, but that wasn't true. I was on the dean's list all the time, but I mean, I didn't graduate, and so I think it was Leanne who corrected that's not, and that's important to me. So now, and it's the truth, I graduated on the dean's list. So that kind of mistake is not to me is not a big deal, because I've made it myself. It's a big deal if I said that I finished my master's in finance at UCLA, because I didn't. I mean, it would be a bigger deal if I said I graduated from law school and just because I had a scholarship to go to law school, because I obviously didn't. Those are important, and those are differentiations that I make. There's also mistakes. You don't make a mistake saying you got a PhD when you don't. That's not a mistake. Well, I know it's more than a white lie. It's a white lie when your husband says, honey, I'll be home at 9, and he comes home at 3 in the morning. Okay? It's a black lie if he's got lipstick on his collar. Yeah? That's right. Okay. And there's differentiations. But I mean, it's the loss in confidence. Now, in my particular case, because my business career has been pretty much running a public company, it's a public record. I mean, what I did is a public record. I mean, it's a matter of record that the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when what I'm looking for, pardon? Well, it depends. You know, I've been in, I think, I don't know, a lot of litigation. I've inherited a lot of the litigation. The companies that I have acquired over the years have had 200 lawsuits attached to them. So, but I mean, like some of the personal development people that we talked about are being sued for fraud, breach of contract, fraud, tortious interference with a contract. Now, I don't want to be in business with those people. I just don't. Okay? I mean, in some of its experience, you ask a lawyer, I said, does this really mean anything? Because you can sue anybody for anything in this country. I mean, bankruptcy, it depends. I mean, if it's bankruptcy and they stiffed 800 investors for, you know, $40 million, and he lives in the Bahamas, I mean, he was bankrupt because he was in the real estate business and he got over-leveraged, that's one thing. A lot of people, I mean, Governor Conley, who I happen to know, or knew, he filed bankruptcy along with the Hunts, and I mean, so bankruptcy is not bad. It depends how the bankruptcy is associated. I mean, what did they do? Did everybody get ripped off and he filed convenient bankruptcy? And because there's different kinds of things, or like some of the guys that came to the New Jersey seminar, they had just filed bankruptcy, and but they had started business again, and all the initial or original investors that went back with them the first time were with them again the second time. Well, that's obviously good. Either they're stupid or it's a good sign that it wasn't their fault. It's still mismanagement of one sort or another. People don't go bankrupt unless they mismanage something or another. And sometimes the mismanagement they have direct control over, sometimes they don't. And you have to read. You have to differentiate. You have to take the time to do your research. You have to investigate. But bankruptcy isn't the end of the world. I mean, but it depends how, if there was, you know, fraud in the inducement and that led to the bankruptcy. Mike, please, back there.
Do you hire private investigators to do that, or you mentioned like Equifax? Are there good?
Well, I happen to have a close association, or I have some friends that are in the business, so I hire real ones.
Investigators?
Real live ones. And if any,
do you divulge who those are?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not on the tape. I won't, but I mean, I'd be more than happy to tell you to recommend various parts of the country: New York, Florida, Texas, Chicago, California, England, South America. I mean, Alabama. Yeah, I can tell you, and who are the real good ones. And to do some of these simple checks doesn't cost very much money. But to do some of the elaborate costs some money. And but if just to give you an example, if you were going to go in a joint venture and invest $5 million with a guy, it's worth spending 10 grand. It's a cheap $10,000. And I can assure you, the other side is doing it to you. I am vocal about it, as Mr. Perot is. Most people aren't vocal about it, but they're doing it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an industry. The industry is not kept up by people, you know, having people check on their husbands and wives. That's not where all the money comes from. It's what I call the white collar type stuff. I mean, law firms use them all the time. All the time. You can go to the county tax assessor. You can go to see property liens. You can go to the grantor deeds. There's a number of ways that you can to check out the person that you're going to do business with, and I would highly recommend it. And if you're not doing that, I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. I met with, I think, 17 people from the Abraham Protege thing. I met with, and I actually seriously talked to me about 6 or 7 people about deals. And I'm talking about this one deal who I thought was a pretty good franchise idea. And I got out of sequence, and I didn't ask one of my normal questions I asked. I said, has anybody been indicted in this deal? That's normally what the first questions I ask. But for some reason, this guy had been an assistant coach on the Olympic wrestling team, and I kind of got enamored with it, and I didn't do it. And I got down to, we were getting closer and closer, and I was going to start thinking about perhaps introducing him to some people. I said, by the way, why is this deal moving from Ohio to Texas? Why don't it seems to me that you ought to do it in Ohio. So we can't do it in Ohio. All of a sudden my back got stiff, and I said, wait a minute, has anybody been indicted in this deal? Yeah. Well, who? He says, the chairman and the CEO and me. Well, who else is in the goddamn deal? There's only 3 principals in the deal. He says, yeah, well, we all did. I said, okay, well, this deal, and this was going to be a public entity, and I was going to introduce him to, I think, Bear Stearns, and forget it. I said, they just laugh at me. They call me and say, Pena, you lost your marbles? The brains got fried by the sun out there in California after all these years? What is this turkey you're sending us? And so, but I didn't ask that question. It's just like when and the people that heard me at the Abraham thing know this. In the late 70s, I did a deal. Now, the way I met Mr. Grazos from Onassa Shipping Lines, I did a deal with Calaveras, the then CEO of Mobil, Grazos, CEO of Onassa Shipping Lines, Imelda Marcos, and the Vatican, and myself. We did a 5-way joint venture. And the Vatican was represented by Cardinal Mancuso or Manchinko or whatever the guy that got thrown in jail for the Vatican Bank, the stealing at the Vatican Bank. Calaveras and Grazos, both Greek, took me aside and says, Dan, you can trust Imelda and you can trust us, but you got to get the money up front from the Vatican. Now, I was raised a Catholic. My children are all Catholics. My wife's a convert Catholic. And this was just foreign to me. What do you mean? He says, Dan, you can trust us, but you got to get the money up front from the Vatican. What do they know? What the hell do they know? I didn't. I got stiffed for $250,000. I didn't even check the letter of credit, which I always do, because I was just happy dealing with a cardinal, your grace, Your Eminence, kissing his ring, and I should have kissed his ass is what I should have kissed, because that's what I wound up kissing, because I was up $250,000, and it came out of my hide, and Imelda Marcos paid, Mobil paid, but I stood the gaff for the Vatican not paying, and it taught me a big lesson in life, and that's about investigate before you invest, and sometimes you have a tendency to let your guard down. I would have wished that I had been a better athlete in school, and I wasn't. And this guy, Olympic coach, and he had been in the '62 Olympics himself, and all these things. And I got all jazzed up with this, and and then when I got down, and then I say, how many people have been indicted? And everybody. And the only reason they want me is because I was clean. And but that was the end of that deal. Forget it. In fact, I was going to introduce him to Earl Martin, who's in Houston, who's a big real estate guy here in town. And am I glad I didn't? Because Earl, I think, respects my opinion. And you can only do that once or twice, and all of a sudden your credibility is down with a tidy bowl man. But even I, who credit myself on being smart about things like that, you get taken away. And it's easier to get taken away in foreign countries. It's been my experience. I got my head handed to me in Mexico once, big time. A number of years ago, I got my head handed to me. A lot of places. And it just, I can't count all the places I'm surprised. I'm like the Highlander in that movie, except my head must grow back. Because that's how they kill the Highlander. They chop his head off, but you can't be too careful. You just can't. And the guys that are the most charming about it are guys from the South. Sweet talking. Words just roll off their lips. John only sounds that way. You can trust John Allen, but he talks. He just those words roll off those lips, and just like when you were back in Tennessee, John Allen. And so I got my head handed to me a few times in Mississippi and a few times in Texas, and once or twice in Alabama, and a couple times in Georgia, and
One time in Pittsburgh.
yes, and one time in Pittsburgh. That's right. Yeah, well, no, but in the north. But I mean, John Allen's talking about a little transaction that almost happened a long time ago. But you gotta. I mean, if you use this checklist, and it's important, and I'll introduce you if you like to people that can get it done in a fairly inexpensive way. You also might want to check when you're going to go to work for an employer. Let's say that you're not out on your own, and you want to know the real truth. I mean, how many lawsuits does this company have against for, illegal termination, etc., etc. You might want to know that. It might be important to you if you're going in at a fairly senior position. It might be important. There's a lot of reasons to use those kinds of things. Now, Auntie. I've already said any problem solved will be replaced immediately by a larger, more complicated one. Otherwise, you're not growing. In dealing with other companies or other businesses, it's never time to count your victories until the deal is over, because he is not as dumb as you think he is, and you're sure as hell not as smart as you think you are. And some of the deals that got away from me over the years, it's because I was already counting the money in my bank account. Because I was visualizing, but I visualized a little too far ahead. I wasn't focused on the deal, and the deal wiggled off the hook, and it got away. And because I was counting my victories beforehand, it's like, again, with my son Derek, they were 5-6 games ahead going into the last few games. There was no way they could lose, be first place. They lost. They had never lost but one game the whole season. They lost 2 in a row to the team that was in second place. They were already planning the victory party. And then all of a sudden the coaches, from being very laissez-faire, let the kids do their thing, have a good time, just swing away. Now I'm sitting in there and they're screaming at Derek, who's the cleanup batter. Pena, and they call a timeout. They drag his little body over to the side, and these grown men are screaming down at him. We need this hit. You've got to drive those runs in. You've got to, Derek. You just got to. I mean, the whole season. And Derek looks up at me in the stands. He looks back and he looks up. You just got to, Derek. The whole season. And the parents in the stands are screaming, get a hit, Pena, get a hit. Derek goes back to the mound. Looks like the bone marrow's come out of his bones. He strikes 2 strikes. He turns around and looks at me and looks at them, and then he takes a big gulp, and then bam, he hits one into center field. And then he was a big hero, And so at the end of the game, he says, Dad, I hope that doesn't happen anymore. He says, Dad, the parents were losing it. They were losing it. And he said, and we were driving home in the car. We went to Chunky Cheese, or I think that's what it's called, some place where kids go crazy and they scream and run around and act wild. And Dan and Derek are discussing the fact that it's gone from have a good time, it's how you play the game now, whether win or lose, to life and death. I mean, these parents would have killed. I mean, they just went wild. And during that same string, I saw a grown man grab a 15-year-old umpire and pick him up off the ground for a call at home plate. And I started, because I thought he was going to hit the kid, so I and another parent started up over the fence, because that's the last thing we need is a parent whacking a kid in front of 600 people on top of it. And then, I mean, it was unbelievable. Now, they did win the next games, and so it was all right, and they won the trophy. But Derek said, they're losing it, Dad. They're just losing it. So every problem will be replaced. But don't count your victories. Because when your eye is on eternity, you can handle what's in the present. I told Derek this, and he told me this was a load of crap. He says, Dad, those coaches' eye was not on eternity. Those coaches were eyes on Derek Stewart Peña hitting the ball right there. He says, what if I would have missed? And I said, don't even think about it. You didn't. Just focus in. And the rest of the season, he went 5 for 5 the last 2 games, and that was it. Just don't even think about it. But I mean, I was trying to think These coaches aren't practicing the 5 credos. I mean, they're not simulating and so, but I mean, it comes down to Derek didn't understand how an adult could change like a chameleon. It was an interesting process, and if you ask him about it, you know, if you ever meet him or when you see him, he doesn't understand that. He just doesn't. Okay. Now, in 1982, John Allen has kept referring to this guy from Pittsburgh, because when we were running out of some cash flow, I almost did something that I would have regretted all my life. Because no matter how easy it might be, never accept short-term solutions for long-term problems. 1982, we ran into a cash flow crunch, and I almost sold half of the company to a crazy man, wacko from Pittsburgh, named whatever his name was anyway. And I almost did, for a lot of reasons. I couldn't come up with more cash. We weren't selling our deals, but at the end of the day, I didn't. Again, in 1983, I had another opportunity. I came into another cash flow problem, which you can all relate to, and I almost sold 20% of the company for something insignificant amount of money. And I relate the story, I think I related it earlier, Bob Guccione almost selling 50% of Penthouse in the early 60s for £1,000 when he was sleeping on a park bench in Hyde Park. But he decided not to, and now Bob Guccione is still a pretty wealthy guy. It's not like he was in his 70s and 80s. But we will be tested. You will be tested in your business where you're going to make a short-term solution to a long-term problem. You will be tested. Somebody will want to give you something that makes a lot of sense right now that by definition doesn't make a lot of sense for down the road. I've been tested since I've been in this business to do joint ventures with purportedly the leading marketing guru in the country. A 50% joint venture. He denies it now, but I have the contract that he signed. I didn't sign mine. Okay? I have been given a joint venture opportunity with the leading guru, get your head screwed on straight guru in the country, to do joint venture infomercials. I was tempted because it would have taken a lot of the onus off me. I wouldn't have had to learn the business. But I'm glad I didn't. You're going to be tested. And remember that. And in a business career, whether it's 5 years or 25 years, you're tested and you're retested and you're retested. And the successful ones and the ones that promote long-term growth, geometric growth, over a longer period of time, withstand those tests. The point for planning for the unplannable is you can't plan for it. I mean, people blame me perhaps that I should have known that the Iraqis were going to invade Kuwait, or the Kuwaitis were going to the Iraqis were going to invade Kuwait because the Kuwaitis were my partners. Now, for that line of reasoning, that rationale is so piss poor. I mean, if our government didn't know, how the hell am I going to know? I mean, I was very close to them. I was their partners. We had done a lot of deals together, a lot of transactions. We had some good times, we've shared some bad times. But you can't plan for a Berlin Wall. You can't plan for Hurricane Andrew, etc., etc. Yet you will be blamed. If you're the head of a deal, you will be blamed. Dean, you build a building or part of it and it falls down, you knew that it was going to fall down. Now, the fact is that you didn't know, but that's just it. That's the way it is. If you take responsibility and authority for something, you will be blamed. That's why I tell you to revel in your successes. Roll around like a dog in slop or hog in slop when you do something right, and give yourself accolades. Start the accolades yourself. Pat yourself on the back so you can remember that and focus on that experience when it's suck up your pantyhose time. Okay. This is a question. How should planning occur? The boss sets the goals and everyone follows, or you ask the lower level employees to state their objectives and move the plan up to the next level until it reaches the top. How many are for A? How many are for B? Okay. Well, the B is the modern B school method. That's management by objectives. And B is the tyrannical entrepreneurial method that is supposedly dead and outlived and outdated. A, yeah, that A is not the modern way companies are run anymore. This is the way companies are run. In fact, all major companies in America are run this way. Fortune 500. I mean, it's not Lee Iacocca who I think he's still chairman. He hasn't stepped down yet. It's not Lee that sets the goals. It's 3 or 4 layers under him, and they keep on going until they get up to him, and then they get final approval. That's not the way corporate America is anymore. Now, I'm here to tell you that to start a company, you can only start it this way. At some level of growth, the company changes to this way. Great Western Resources was just getting to this level when I left. And now it is at that level. Some would argue that the growth will not be the same. Only time will tell. But most people manage A in the A method, and as opposed to the B. Now, how many of you took a plane to get here? Okay. What's the first thing the pilot and the co-pilot, and if it's got an engineer, do when they get in the plane? Pre-flight. Check flight plan. 90% of the time, the plane, just like this rocket example, is off course. And it fails its way to the moon by continually making mistakes and correcting them. Those of you that flew here, I'll talk to you. Thanks. Okay. Okay, thank you, Cornell. It fails its way to the moon. When you hear mission control, especially down this part of the world, what are they continually saying? Okay, adjust this, that. They're adjusting their flight plan, just as if you flew here on Continental or Southwest or however you got here. You continue to adjust, because even a 1% deviation, if you're flying from New York to here, where's 1% off? If you're 1% off when you start, where would you hit? Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean and somewhere over Iowa. Okay, but you're continuing to adjust. And in planning, most organizations set a plan. If this is the plan here, and they put it, the chairman or the CEO or the entrepreneur puts it in the bottom drawer and never looks at it again. They never look at it again. And they never adjust it. Planning, as we're going to see in a minute here, is all about constant mistakes and constant correction of them. Constant. Now, to achieve quantum scared me, Auntie. To achieve quantum growth, tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I'll forget. Involve me and I'll understand and grow. What happens for most entrepreneurs is they don't involve their employees in the planning process. They tell them, or they even show them, but they don't involve them. Involve me and I'll understand and grow with you. And for you to get to where you want to go, you have to have your people grow and embrace your dream just as you embrace it, and become just as passionate as you are about it. Otherwise, the chances of its coming to realization or its fruition are virtually zero. When Lee Iacocca saved, and I like to use Lee because I have a lot of respect for him as a manager, when Lee Iacocca was brought in to save Chrysler, a lot of people don't remember he worked for $1 a year. They don't remember that. For several years he worked for $1 a year. They only remember now he was getting paid $20, $30 million a year. They don't remember that he saved, in my judgment, and in a lot of people's judgments, the auto industry. Not just Chrysler, but he involved his people. He made the passion live at Chrysler, and that made his job easier because he had, 106,000 employees, I think, all with the same passion he did. Of course, they were working to save their own jobs, but he made it bigger. They were saving the auto industry. I couldn't have done what I did at Great Western Resources without instilling that same passion. Now, they've forgotten that I instilled that passion in recent months, but we're going to get them straightened out in a week or two. But we made a film, a promotional film, where we have a series of people get up and say, Dan is Jesus Christ. He's the greatest thing since Napoleon Hill. He's this, he's that. We wouldn't be here. Of course, that's part of the evidence that we're going to use. But but I instilled that passion, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And I'm real good at that. I've instilled it in Casey. I keep talking about him because, you know, my neck used to pound, my veins used to bulge like that too a few years back. I've instilled it, and I'm very good at instilling it. In fact, they asked me if I wanted to coach Little League next year. And I declined, gracefully declined, even though I think that I could instill more motivation in the kids than most of the coaches did. But the kids, I believe people and children want to be led. And they sure needed some leadership on that baseball league. There's no question about that, except for the one team. And then at the end, they all collapsed, you know, because they thought they were going to lose the pennant. But you've got to instill that passion. You've got to involve the people that you're around. Now, I like to ask the question: how many of you think that the art of management is a science, as opposed to the art of management being, management being a science or management being an art? That's what I'm trying to say. Excuse me. How many think it's an art? How many think it's a science? Okay. Now, leadership, art. Culture, art. Decision making, more a science. There are machines now in the big organizations that have eliminated 85% of meetings. All the data comes in from all the departments. You don't know who it's coming from other than it's at the department head. So when I, as CEO, look at it, I don't know what the son of a bitch didn't agree with me. So it's taking the emotion out of it. Then the meeting, and then they go through all the permutations, the decision making, and it comes up with the 4 likely scenarios, most likely to succeed. They have a short meeting, and they vote on those 4. Instead of all the debate, and they have programs like that, and they have and the IBM, Xerox, General Motors, and all the big companies use them. Now, Great Western wasn't large enough to use that kind of decision-making process tool, but it's getting more towards the scientific. Although at this juncture, it's still an art. Planning is scientific. Organizing is scientific. Control, if you do it the way Burrell did it, it was an art. If you do it the way big companies do it, it's a science, because controls in companies you institute by computers. But in Harold Janine's book, Management, he states that reading a book is not the same as managing a business. A book is read from the front to back, whereas management requires starting at the back with a goal and then devising a sequence of short-term steps to reach a goal. Just think about that. You're going ass backwards. You're starting, again, remember, it's where you land. It's not in between. So you're starting with, I want to land there, $2 billion. And that's what makes being an entrepreneur or running a business so, in my judgment, so dynamic and so passionate and so much fun, because you really can mold it the way you want. Now, I'd like to send out a handout, and this is an 11 steps from idea to execution. Again, before I started this was not memorialized, because I just did this by I just did it. I didn't think about it because I've done it so much. And we have put together an overhead and a handout that I think is pretty damn effective in explaining Okay, and this is where we're going to do a little workshop here. Okay, you identify an idea, something you want to do. You want to take your company into a new venture. You want to identify a joint venture partner. You want to expand your revenue. You want whatever the idea is. You investigate it using the investigative checklist I've already handed out to see if it really is what you think it is. And then when you think it is, then you investigate it again. Again, you repeat the same process. You use a different set of people in your organization, the second investigation. You split it up. If they come back with the same answer both times or reasonably close to the same answer, okay, then you go to the next step. Now you've made a commitment to the idea. You've made the commitment. Nobody else yet. And you build. If you can't get obsessed with the idea right then and there, shit can't. If you can't get obsessed right then and there, forget it. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Because if you can't get obsessed with it, I assure you, you're not going to get anybody else obsessed with it. Then you go to step 5, the preliminary decision. That's you and your other decision makers, where you share the obsession and you start living it totally. You talk about how great it's going to be, how good it's for the company, how good it's for America, how good it's for Sears and Roebuck, how good it's for Mother and Apple Pie, how good it's for fighting against AIDS. That's all you talk about it. You live it, you breathe it. You talk about how it's going to help the church, how it's going to, everything. You just talk about it. And you share that obsession with your people. That's all you talk about. You don't talk about anything else. Nothing. Your whole life is that deal or that idea that you're trying to do. Then you investigate it again. This is normally when I do the private investigator at this stage. Then you put together a decision action plan, you and other decision makers. You further expand the obsession by bringing more of your junior, your subordinate decision makers in on it. You walk your talk, and you never, ever, 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 ever share a doubt that you might have about it. I don't care if you can't sleep at night. I don't care if it makes your hemorrhoids come out thinking about the deal at this juncture. You never, ever, ever share a doubt with your wife, your husband, your mistress, your goddamn... Never! Leanne knows the darker it gets in that tunnel, the more positive I am. Now, I may have a doubt, but I sure as hell never share it with anybody. Never. When Winston Churchill was leading... Yeah, I guess he was Prime Minister from the beginning of the war. He had a lot of doubts. Read his books. But you never saw the little drunken, short, pudgy guy ever share those doubts. Never. He was like a bulldog. This is where deals fall apart. Gee, Dean, do you really think this is going to work? Well, I don't know, Dan. Jesus, I think it's a load of crap myself, but and that's how it starts. And then it's dead. It's over. It's down with the tidy bow man. I had a lot of doubts building Great Western. I never shared one with Charlie Soliday, Mark Harrison, my wife, or anybody else. Ever. Now you put together a critical path. Where the other decision makers put it, you don't put it together. They put it together. Because they are going to have to comply with it. They are going to have to implement it, execute it, and be responsible for it because they have the authority. And if they don't get it done, you're going to put their head on a pole. So you don't get involved in the critical path at all. Now, you put together, part of that is a detailed observation of timeline, and you continually measure every single facet of that critical path. You don't, they do. Because it's their neck. Now, the other decision makers implement this critical path, and they keep focused follow-up at other levels. Those are subordinate levels. They are now focused on their subordinate levels that are doing what I call the grunt work, the real worker bees that actually do things. Now you have focused follow-up at the decision-maker level. So this level is focusing on the two levels below that. Then with the execution, you're laser beam focused. You don't deviate. The racehorse, why does it wear blinders? That's all you can see. You don't look at anything else. Right now in Casey's life, there's only one thing in his life right now. I know that. There's only one. And I know I have had that feeling a lot of times in my life. That's it. Then you lead from the front by never second-guessing yourself or your subordinates, because they'll make mistakes at this critical path level. They'll make mistakes at the implementation level. And the only time I ever stepped in and overrode my subordinates was when I thought it was going to take the company down. You cannot have people grow and grow in a quantum way unless you allow them to make mistakes. You cannot. Not mistakes that, Dan, don't go run out in front of the bus and let him get killed. You've got to allow your people to grow, because you can't grow geometrically without them growing geometrically. Then you reevaluate, the reevaluation of the monitoring process, and you start all over again. Mike, excuse me.
When you first started at Great Western,
Yep.
you were the principal and the decision maker.
Yep.
So you did all of this, all of the spots where it says other decision makers.
Yeah.
That was you. So it's
That's
just
right, yeah. We're going to get to another plan, Auntie. When I was doing it all by myself, another handout. Is it? Oh, they have it? Okay. When I was doing it by myself, and I had nobody, I like to abbreviate things anyway, there was an outcome, a desired completion I wanted. I made a commitment. I did, Dan Pena, which meant my wife and Dan Jr., who was alive, they made the commitment, they just didn't know it, because I made it for them. Then that commitment, there was a pay price to action, which we're going to see in the next chart. That means the price that I was willing to pay. 1987, I was willing to pay 242 days of being away from my family. The reason we know that is because we have to keep track for the Inland Revenue Service, because I pay taxes in the UK. That's how come we know it's 242 days, because she checked those days off. That's a lot of days to be away. Okay, then I'd measure periodically. I would measure the results. And I would modify as I saw me being off course. And I'd change the plan as necessary, and then I'd measure the modified plan. What did I mean by pay price to action? These are examples. We all want more revenue. We all want higher net worth. This is for the guys who used to run. Be a 3-hour marathon or lose 20 pounds. Have a well-adjusted children. We all have problems, but we don't want to solve all our problems. See, you only think you want to solve all your problems. You don't. I could go down one by one, and you can tell me your 3 biggest challenges in life, and probably at least 2 of them you don't really want to solve, because, it depends on the cost to solve, or the pay price to action. What's the cost to solve that problem? We want to be wealthy, problem, but we don't want to pay the price, action. We want to be fit, problem, but we don't want to pay the price, have to get up at 4:30 every morning. We want to be a concert pianist. We want to be a champion tennis player. We want to be a lot of things. But are we willing to pay the price? That's why I said earlier on, and I got some funny looks, not everybody really wants to be successful. More people just like talking about being successful, flapping their lips, watching the air bounce off their teeth. It's the pay price to action. you don't have to know how you're going to get there, but you need to know where you want to go. It gets back to, you don't know, you want the landing spots, and you're going to fail your way by adjusting until you get there. Now, this is important for the intellects in the audience, and there are always some, the people that are going to go back and analyze my words and what did he really mean, and that's really not true, and, pontificate about this. Absence of evidence is not evidence of their absence. Just because you've never experienced it doesn't make it not true. Plenty of guys have experienced it. Some have written books. Nobody that I know is doing this like I'm doing that has experienced it. I made my money not selling books, tapes, or putting asses on seminar seats. I made it the Vince Lombardi way. Okay, another handout. Yeah, that's there. No, yeah, another handout. Quantum leap plan. God, it scares me when I'm on time. Put that other one up about absence of evidence. I saw some people blanched. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not true. Remember that. The object of this exercise today is that now you will have developed a sense where you will appreciate when you have experienced it. Okay, let's get to the handout. Okay, now this is, again, because of the questions and the people that have asked, well, how do we put together a quantum leap plan? And I would strongly urge, I would beg you to complete this before you spend $1 or 1 minute of your time on anything. And if you can't answer these questions, I mean, you know the difference between BS and, if you can't answer them, then I would suggest that the idea or plan isn't worth pursuing. In fact, I would tell you by definition, I can absolutely guarantee that the idea is not worth pursuing if you can't answer all those questions. And I mean not yes, no, maybe answers. I mean real answers. Like number 7, can I laser beam focus on this vehicle? Here's what I'm willing to forsake for its success. There are no free lunches, ladies and gentlemen. There just aren't. What are you willing to forsake for this success?
Dan, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Laser beam focus. You're talking about one deal at a time. For someone like myself who has maybe 5, 6, 7 going on at once, do you laser beam focus as a whole, or you have to
what you
laser
do
beam in each deal?
is you handle challenge by challenge. And sometimes they'll all come at once. And you have to be, because you're in a business that you can't turn down selling properties, and you take them one at a time. Sometimes they'll all come, like you said, 6 in a day and a half, or whatever it was, 6 in 2 days. And then you've got to exclude everything else, and you've got to handle those as they come, one at a time. Sometimes some of the same problems or challenges that you'll have in 2 or 3 of the deals will be the same. Then you have the benefit of doing 2 or 3 at the same. Normally that doesn't happen. My experiences, there are always different problems. And I've got, I'm spread all over the place. There was a time frame back in 1985 that I believe I made 3 trips from Amsterdam to London, Amsterdam to Houston, Texas, 3 times in 5 days, if I remember correctly. because we couldn't have board meetings in London because we didn't want to be a taxable entity there, so we had to do it from Amsterdam. And I had to keep racing back and forth dealing with the bank, and we were trying to go public on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, which we were also public on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And none of the problems were the same. Every time I put out one fire and I get to Amsterdam and I have to come back to Houston, and by the time I got back to Houston the third time, I didn't know if it was Tuesday, Monday, I didn't know if it was April, because, you know, I've dealt with jet lag a lot of years and I've traveled a lot of miles, but I mean, that was pushing me to the limit. I mean, but I didn't know, I'd be in the meeting, I'd stand up and I get lightheaded, and I didn't have the luxury of being able to bunch the solutions together. So you've just got to handle them one at a time, and handle as many as you can in a day, get some sleep, and then just tackle them again the next day, and then just tackle them again the next day. And don't get deviated off on something else. Certainly don't start another deal until you get those closed up. If it's a sale, if somebody walks in and says, here's my money, well, then you take it like a vacuum cleaner, like they say, you just hoover it right in. Then now you got 7 deals. But you don't go out and generate until you get those done. Because in sales especially, it's too easy for the deal to wiggle off the hook unless things have changed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I don't consider the little sales a deal. I mean, those will just come. I'm talking about the bigger ones.
Okay, well
Like
the
land development, like some you have 4, 5, 6 of them on the go.
No, well that's true. Well then, I mean, you have to handle those just as I just described.
Okay.
You just go from one to another. You don't let up. Now, okay, another handout. How to avoid devastating reversals. I wish I had this 15 years ago. My book of mistakes wouldn't be 10 times bigger than my book on success. Someday, you know, John Ernest said, he said, Dan, you ought to write a book on all the mistakes you made. I said, who'd buy it? I mean, other than the people that don't like me. I mean, he says, well, you got a lot of those, Dan. I mean, you might sell, have a million seller after all. Okay. This is kind of a compilation of things that we've already discussed in principle, not in principle, in a great deal of detail. And I can't emphasize enough that and the last one is probably the one that will keep you out of the most trouble, and investigate before you invest. Okay. Now, we're going to go through this fairly quickly because we've already spent a lot of time. We already know to shoot high. It doesn't cost anything to shoot high. And whatever your goals were when you came here, just multiply them times 10. Don't add zeros, just multiply them times 10. And when I say always, always, always pay yourself first, I don't mean first in that sense. I mean as you go through a business or a life cycle, you will have good times. Take money out. Because what you always tell yourself is, I'll take it out down the road. Taxes or whatever the reason. Down the road may never come. One of the reasons I was one of the highest paid executives in the United States from 1986 to 1991 is because I took it out as we were making it. I cashed in all the way, because this is not my first life cycle from being successful. I've been successful 2 times before, and I didn't take it out. And it went all down with the tidy bow man. This is my 3rd fortune I'm working on, and I got at least 1 or 2 more in me. And I learned the hard way. And so now I take it out, and I pay the employees the same as me. I got it made a lot more than them, but I took it out. I didn't believe in retained earnings that much. I believed in income and paying dividends. That's an important point because nothing's forever. Glory is fleeting. Believe me, revel in it. Okay, Auntie. Oh, this is a different way. Omar Khayyam said it a little different, more nicely than I. But some for the glories of this world, and some sigh for the prophet's paradise to come. Take the cash and let the promise go, nor heed the music of a distant drummer. And I don't know what year that was, but it was a long time ago, but he had it right then. Take the damn cash. Take the cash. Okay. Now this is important. Now these aren't coincidences. Now I use my castle because it's important, because you all know that I visualized, I read the Robb report, and I visualized that I was going to have a castle. I set the goal in April 1983. I started looking at castles in Thanksgiving of 1983, and I didn't have any money. We went to buy castles anyway. We went to the UK on Thanksgiving, and I remember I had bought that UK subsidiary from a large John Allen, who's gone, on New Year's Eve in 1983. Now, did I buy that UK subsidiary because I had started looking at castles? We'll never know. We'll never know. Then I visited the UK company, remember, in the spring of '84 to see what kind of assets I bought. While I was there, I saw a huge opportunity to take Great Western public. Now, would I have been in the UK to find the opportunity to take Great Western public if I hadn't been looking at castles? We'll never know. I went back to the U.S. and found something to take public. Didn't have anything to take public. Paid a guy 60 grand. Went public on my 39th birthday, August 10th, 1984. Made my final offer on the castle August of '84. Moved into the castle in September '84. Now you tell me, was it all a coincidence? No. Was it a coincidence when Napoleon Hill closed his eyes, poor little kid, in the creek in Tennessee, and visualized that Rolls Royce, and then someday driving back? No. What you think about most, what you are obsessed about most, you will become. This is the castle, Guthrie Castle, is the perfect metaphor for yesterday's dreams or today's realities. For those of you, well, John Allen's gone now, but Auntie's been there, and you've seen pictures of it. And that was my dream, my goal. And now I'm working on new dreams and new goals. And you have a dream. But I can tell you that if I hadn't been looking at the Robb report, I may have never gone public in 1984, and I may have never turned $60,000 into $50 million. We'll never know. Now, my wife and I know it wasn't a coincidence. We know. Of course, Linda, who I call a princess, she just thought you fall in love, you marry somebody, your college boyfriend, and you live in a castle. That's how Linda thinks. That's the way life is. I mean, now we've had some ups and downs over the last 20 years, so she knows it's not quite that simple. And it's a lot harder to stay on top than it is to get on top. But it's important for you to understand that, and I'm not the first one to say this, and I'm not saying that Napoleon Hill and I are the only two guys that have any brains, but I mean, it works. I mean, Ross Perot saw him having the largest, whatever that kind of company he had was in the world. And I think he did. He got there. I mean, and it's what you think about. Auntie? We all know I had a less than stellar start, and so we don't need to go through that, even though I like talking about me being in jail and stuff. Next. Okay. You can think positively all day long, all year, but it's positive action that counts. And hopefully from tonight and today and this morning, you will have come away with the will, the desire, the knowledge to know that you can make it happen for yourself. Because nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Somebody famous said this, and some of you probably already know. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. I love that. Educated derelicts. I know a lot of them, too. There's a lot of them here in Houston. Believe, but there's a lot in Los Angeles, too. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Who, by the way, who said that? Now, don't you answer no. Okay. Does anybody know who said that? No. No, Ray Kroc, who took it from Calvin Coolidge. But Ray Kroc, that was the motto for McDonald's. Burl, trying harder and harder starts producing less and less. Well, this isn't about trying harder. Now, Napoleon Hill said what I've said so far today in a different way. These are his 13 steps to success. I'm not going to go through all of them. But the interesting point about it is he always talked about towards riches. Towards riches. The name of the book is Think and Grow Rich. It's not Think and Be Smart. It's not Think and Go to Hawaii. It's not Think and Make your parents happy. It's not Think and Make... It's Think and Grow Rich. Because he was concerned when he interviewed those 500 men on how, why, what they did. Now they call it Success Leaves Clues. Now, for those of you that are strong in your Latin, nemo post haste ex mire patrium, perhaps I can work with your dream. And I'm more than willing to. I know Casey knows that and a few others know it. The easiest way for me to do that is if we work on some project together, and I don't know what that project is. You think it up and you talk to me about it, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. But the fact is that I do. I think that it's evidenced enough here today that I do care. I want you to be successful. And it's not because I'm a philanthropist, because the more successful you are and the more people you tell, the more successful I'm going to be. I mean, it's not because I'm philanthropic. Sic transit gloria mundi. I bet you wonder where I get all this Latin stuff, huh? I certainly didn't take Latin. It's my priest friend. Okay. Because thus passes the glory of the world. And glory is fleeting. Ladies and gentlemen, you will have success. I've told you to revel in it. Wallow in it like a pig in slop. Because nothing's forever. There have been people here that have made money in up cycles. And the down cycle comes. The down cycle comes. You're never at the top in golf, tennis, football. The cycle gets over. And I mean, it's fleeting, so enjoy yourself. In the book, I've listed some profoundly sad moments in my life. I've talked about leaving Great Western Resources. I've talked about this new venture. And there is a poem that I like to read towards the end of the seminar. And but before we do that, what I want you to do is I want you to get ruthless about doing something different. I want you to get ruthless with yourself. I mean, get mean. Because the more ruthless you get with yourself, the higher the probability of your success. Because your doubts are not the product of accurate thinking, but habitual thinking. Your doubts are not the product of accurate thinking, but a habitual thinking. Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it can't happen. There's a portion in the back of the book where I wrote the eulogy to Charlie Soliday, my former partner's at his funeral. I gave his eulogy. And it's all about winners and losers, and he was clearly a winner. And I would read that because the eulogy talked about somebody beyond question that could get it done in the kinds of things we're talking about. I also have in the back of the book a speech I wrote that really encapsulates or embodies most of the principles I believe in. I gave it at the commencement a couple years ago where I went to school. And this is how it ends, my speech. And even though I've told you to investigate, if you trust no one, you can't trust yourself. And you have to have faith in the people that you do business with. And one of the things that I've always prided myself is I always assume people are honest. I investigate a lot. I assume they're honest. I assume that I'm going to be dealt with fairly. And then when I'm not, then I mean, all the rules change. And in closing, just remember, if you're going to do more of the same, usually you just get more of the same. And this seminar should have opened your eyes that there is a different way of doing things, and just because you haven't experienced doesn't mean it hasn't happened. If you do not expect it, you will not find the unexpected, for it is hard to find and difficult. You've got to expect success. You've got to expect geometric success, because if you don't expect it, you're not going to get it. You've got to expect to be able to go to law school and sing at the same time, because if you don't expect it, it sure as hell is not going to happen if that's what you decide to do. You've got to expect that you're going to be able to grow your ladies' entrepreneur business or association. You've got to expect you can do the things that we talked about, attracting the lobby for the elderly. You've got to expect that. You've got to expect that you're going to be able to find somebody to joint venture and work along with to do the financial seminars. You've got to expect those things, because if you don't expect them, they don't happen. Now, I've been called gifted before, which I'm not. Most of the people in this room are probably smarter than I am. From an intellectual IQ point of view, read more books than I have. I told you earlier I only read 3 books. I read one of them twice. Now, I'm kind of proud of that. I've read more books recently, but the people we call gifted are different from the crowd in one way, one very special way. They accepted their gifts. They let it happen. The high achievers, the person you admire, are those individuals who open their gifts. These winners have more gifts because they claimed them, took them out of the wrapping, and used them. Everybody in this room has the same gifts that people accuse me of having. Everybody in this room. Everybody in every room that I've ever talked in front of in the last 15 or 20 years. Some people open them, unwrap them. Some people leave them under the tree. Are there any general questions? Mike, please. Thank you, Becky. Yes, sir.
Do you know how your concept of what rich means to you evolved?
Yeah. I know exactly how it evolved. As you all know, and which I pointed out pretty in depth, I came from a very humble background. And when I saw people that I was absolutely positive that I knew that I was more intellectually prepared to be successful, and that I knew that I felt more successful with their trappings than they did, and they had them, I knew there was something that was wrong. There was a dichotomy someplace. So that dichotomy, the way I changed that was to change my economic environment. And how I changed my economic environment is I hung around with and I tried to model and pattern myself after very successful people. And the more successful people that I hung around with, the more my goals changed. When I had the pleasure and privilege of being around Konstantin Gratsos, CEO of Manassas Shipping Lines, he changed my way of thinking. It was very obvious to me that he would have 5 or 6 meetings in his room. He had an office about 3/4 this big, and he had little couches and chairs, setups around, and he would shuffle around from meeting to meeting, and he'd listen to that and says, "That doesn't work. Try it that way. That's no good. We tried that in 41." And he would just shuffle around. I mean, he'd only listen to them 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Most. Sometimes he'd only listen 10 or 20 seconds. Now, that gave me great insight. Here I was a guy that studied these goddamn things for weeks. I mean, for weeks. Now, one of the only things that I researched real heavily at that time is getting married. I was engaged longer than probably any human being in North America, according to my wife. I mean, another thing I researched real well is I waited 9.5 years before we had any kids because I wasn't sure I was going to stay married. But once I made that commitment, I've been married to the same woman now 3 times.